I moved into this neighborhood on a late autumn day when the leaves in the nearby park had begun to turn gold and drift down like thin ashes. By day, the park stretched like a soft green carpet, children running around the slides, old people doing their morning exercises, dogs tumbling in the grass. On weekends and holidays, it was noisy, alive. But at night, the park transformed into another world. Wind whispering through the trees, streetlights flickering once before going still, and beside the public restroom stood a glass phone booth, glowing too brightly, as if determined to prove it was still alive. That night, I was unpacking, surrounded by boxes sealed with tape. The hands of the clock had already crossed midnight. Sweat trickled down my neck. My fingers were numb. My brain felt full of dust. I needed air somewhere without the smell of cardboard or the echo of my own sighs. So I thought of the park. Outside, the air was thin and cold. From the balcony of my third-floor apartment, I could see part of the park. Dark branches slicing across the grass. And in the distance, that glowing phone booth, white and still. I put on my jacket, went down the stairs. Each step on the concrete landed like a slow heartbeat, clack, clack, clack. Steady hollow pulling me forward. The park was almost empty. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and faint rust from the swings. As I walked the paved path, dry leaves rolled by like cautious creatures. At the end of the path, the phone booth stood hunched like a tired guard. The light inside spilled a pale rectangle onto the ground. Just a phone booth, I told myself. But for some reason, each time I looked, I felt something looking back from inside through fogged glass. That night, I simply circled the park once and went home. From my window upstairs, the booth was still visible, glowing quietly like an open eye that refused to close. I went back to unpacking. After a few hours, I sealed the final box. When I checked the clock again, it was 1:03 a.m. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since afternoon. There was a convenience store a short walk away. I slipped on my coat, took my wallet, locked the door. The moment I stepped into the corridor, a faint sensation brushed the back of my neck. Someone watching. Not strong, just a cold fingertip pressing lightly. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what wasn't there. Down the stairs onto the empty street. Far ahead, the traffic light blinked yellow. The park stretched before me, silent as a dark pond. As I passed, I saw the booth again. Normally, I would have walked right by, but this time, I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe the light was too clean, too white against the darkness. I stepped closer. Empty inside. The receiver hung neatly, the coiled wire black, and still the keypad. Dull the change tray glinting with a few tarnished coins. A faint smudge streaked down the glass like a handprint, dragged slowly. I stared for maybe 2 minutes, maybe longer. My mind emptied. Only the wind and the metallic smell remained. Then suddenly I snapped out of it, embarrassed by my own stillness, turned and ran toward the store. The convenience store was bright, warm, absurdly safe. I grabbed candy, a bento, a drink. The clerk yawned without looking at me. I stayed longer than necessary, afraid that if I stepped out too soon, the darkness would be waiting for me. Still, I had to go home. Halfway through the park, I needed the restroom badly. No one was around. The public toilet stood near the phone booth. Just quick, I told myself. The restroom smelled of detergent, damp tiles, faint metal. My footsteps echoed between the stalls. I chose the second one, locked it. The silence pressed in until I could hear my own breathing, the faintest movements of my body. When I finished and stepped out to wash my hands, the phone began to ring. It wasn't mine. I knew that my phone was on silent, and this sound was different. Clear old metallic. It was very close. I lifted my head. The mirror reflected my face and the half-open door behind me. The ringing continued, calm, unhurried, precise. I turned off the tap, listened. It came from outside, from the phone booth. I froze. Two thoughts rose in my mind, as clear as print on glass. What would happen if I answered? Don't answer it. Curiosity and fear fought inside my skull like two cats in the dark. I imagined myself pushing the door open, stepping into the white glow, lifting the receiver, whispering, "Hello?" And then a voice, breathing right behind me. I didn't answer. I ran. As I bolted out of the restroom, the phone kept ringing behind me, steady, close, as if counting my steps. Leaves cracked under my shoes. Plastic bags thudded against my leg. I didn't look back. I sprinted up the stairs to my apartment, jammed the key, slammed the door, pressed my back against it. Silence. Inside, everything felt weightless, unreal. I sank into the sofa. My heartbeat filled my ears, thump, thump, thump. Only one question circled in my head: who would call a public phone at 1 a.m.? I turned off the lights, pulled the curtain slightly aside. From my window, I could see the park. The booth still glowed. I couldn't tell if it was still ringing. I watched. A man appeared from the direction of the restroom. The fluorescent light cast him in white. In his right hand, a mobile phone. In his left, something long and metallic, a knife, or some kind of tool. He stopped by the booth, but didn't go in. He stood just outside the light, in the edge of shadow, tilting his head, listening. I could swear he was smiling, not happily, but knowingly. I held my breath. The pieces clicked, the ringing, the empty park, the booth, the glow. He must have been inside the restroom all along. He dialed the booth's number from his cell phone, waited for someone to pick up, then crept up from behind. From my window, he lifted his head, right toward me. I dropped the curtain. I sat there in the dark, listening. Maybe I imagined faint scraping or breathing or the whisper of fabric against metal. Maybe it was only the wind. Or maybe he was still there waiting. When I opened my eyes again, it was 2:11 a.m. I peeked out. He was gone. The booth looked different, somehow brighter, emptier. I locked the chain on my door and left the light on all night. But I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, the ringing returned, clean and piercing. When I opened them, silence. When I turned toward the wall, a faint tick, like a fingernail on glass. I turned on the TV with no sound, just moving light. I watched until dawn. Morning came gentle, cruelly normal. I poured coffee, tried to smile at my reflection. Maybe I was just tired. To prove it, I went back to the park. Sunlight made everything ordinary: children playing, dogs barking. The booth stood harmless, its light off. I stepped inside. It smelled of old plastic. The receiver hung neatly. On the glass was a faint smear, the same as last night. Across the keypad, A fresh scratch ran from 0 to hell, as if someone had dragged a blade there over and over while waiting. That night I stayed in, but around midnight I wandered to the balcony again. The booth's light was on. I couldn't tell when it had turned back. The city slept. Somewhere a car passed brakes, whispering, and then the ringing. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, polite. Rin, rin, rin. I didn't move. I opened the balcony door a crack. The sound grew clearer, closer. It rang 15 times, then stopped. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. I was about to close the door when a figure stepped from the trees beside the restroom. Him. The same man, same slow gait. He took something from his coat pocket, his phone. He dialed. He waited. Then he drew from his other pocket something long and bright metal, catching the booth's light. He didn't go inside. He stood behind the booth, perfectly hidden from my window by a tree. He tilted his head, waiting. The light was the bait. When someone stepped inside, they'd be visible, vulnerable. Head tilted, neck exposed. One step from behind. That's all it would take. The first night, I had stood in front of that glass for 2 minutes. If the phone had rung then, a chill crawled up my spine like a wet finger. I shut the curtain. I didn't sleep. I sat by the door with a small box cutter in my hand, useless but heavy enough to hold on to. I listened cars, cups, clinking below footsteps in the hall. No ringing. At dawn, I called the police. They noted my report. We'll send a patrol. I knew how long that gap could be. That afternoon, I checked again before dark. The booth's keypad still bore the scratch. On the floor lay a thin black thread, maybe from a glove. I didn't touch it. I stood in the shadow behind the booth. From there, you could see clearly how the trees blocked the view from my apartment. Whoever planned this knew exactly where to stand. Night fell. I locked both bolts, turned off all lights except the kitchen's dim one. The apartment felt hollow, drifting. 1:07 a.m. The phone rang again. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. Like someone testing. I stood still. Rin, rin, rin. I counted 24 cycles before it stopped. Maybe he saw my shadow move behind the curtain. Maybe he was counting too. I don't remember if it rang again. Only that I sat on the floor gripping the knife, whispering inside my head, "Don't answer, don't answer." Morning. Sunlight indifferent. I decided to leave for a few days until patrols made whoever it was lose interest. I packed a small bag, stepped onto the balcony for one last breath. The park lay quiet under a veil of mist. The booth light off, peaceful. Maybe fear was only the shadow of coincidence. Down by the restroom, a janitor mopped the tiles. As I watched, a man stepped out. He wore a light coat, carried a plastic bag. Not the same man, I told myself, but then he stopped, took out his phone, dialed. I couldn't hear from this distance, but I saw it. The booth lit up again. He stood just outside. The light tilted his head, waiting. His left hand no longer held the plastic bag. It held something metallic. Glinting, my stomach dropped. Coffee spilled from my cup, dripping along the balcony rail like a brown wire. That night, I didn't stay home. I crashed on a friend's couch. Before leaving, I turned off every light, closed every curtain, locked the door. I didn't want to see that glow again. Still lying awake in the unfamiliar room, I imagined lifting a cold receiver to my ear, hearing silence with breathing in it, and then a whisper so close it brushed the back of my neck. "I see you." I jerked upright, cursed myself, drank water, tried to laugh it off. But one thought lingered. If that night curiosity had won, if I had answered that call, if I had leaned my head just a little to the side, a blade might have drawn a straight line through the space between my bones. The next day, a note from the police lay under my door. Patrol complete. No suspicious activity observed. I turned on the lights, thanked the ordinary world for pretending to be safe. Sometimes, rarely, after midnight, I still hear the ringing, not real, but clear enough to know what it is. I open my eyes, stare at the ceiling, and I don't answer. On windy nights, the air carries the faint scent of rust detergent and cold glass. I know the booth is still there, patient awake, waiting for someone who believes late-night calls always come for a good reason. I don't know whether it rang during those 2 minutes I stood there the first night. I only know that whenever I remember, the back of my neck feels cold, as if something invisible had passed too close. So now whenever I walk past the park at night, I take the long way around. I avoid that pale light as one avoids the smile of someone watching from the dark. Curiosity takes us many places. Fear brings us home alive. I'm grateful my fear won that night, because somewhere at 1 a.m., a payphone still rings. Clear, steady, metallic, rin, rin, rin. For anyone foolish enough to believe that every midnight call has a kind intention.